Well, great. Well, thank you for sticking around for the last, and I think far and away probably what's going to be the most interesting panel. You know, we've heard a lot today about what could happen, what should happen, and these guys really are the guys on the front lines making it happen. And you know, they're chasing a huge opportunity. Many of you maybe remember the movie The Social Network, and it has this famous line. Justin Timberlake's character says, you know, remarks that, you know, what's $1 million isn't cool. What's cool is $1 billion. Well, the guys on this stage are chasing an opportunity that annually, in the U.S. alone, the electricity market's $365 billion a year. Worldwide, it's over $2 trillion. So, you know, the fact that they're in that space and the things that they're doing is going to be impressive, and that's kind of what we want to get into today. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go around, introduce everyone, and then follow up and let them sort of in a sentence or two basically explain which of what aspect of kind of the energy transformation problem they're looking to solve. So starting from the far end, we've got Ken Valentine, who's the Vice President of Business Development, Technology Services at Piedmont Natural Gas. Next to him is Joe Forbes, the CEO of Causam Energy. Next is Josh Gould, the Technology to Market Advisor for ARPA-E. John Morrison is the Senior VP of Asset Management for Strata Solar. Nachum Sadan is the President and CEO of GridEdge Networks. And next to me is Chad Eckhardt, the President and CEO of GridBridge. So maybe just to kick things off and get into it, Ken, if you could, you know, just in a sentence or two, basically explain what aspect of the energy puzzle your company is focused on solving.
Okay, thanks, Locke, and thanks for inviting me here today. I think I see natural gas as an enabling fuel out there for so many things, whether it's augmenting solar and wind, whether it's direct use, which is very efficient and clean, whether it's for power generation now. Half our throughput now is power generation, displacing coal mostly. So it's an enabling fuel for so many uses on the microgrid, you know, for combined heat and power, microturbine, fuel cell technologies. You know, it's there for everything. It's efficient to move. Duke isn't building generation plants in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and building transmission lines in North Carolina. They're moving molecules down. It's more efficient to move gas. And that's what we do at Piedmont, is this demand for gas in so many forms. How can we buy and invest infrastructure to move it? How can we meet customer services, whether it's big power generators like Duke or homes and businesses? You know, so that's really what we're about.
Well, first, amongst all these great power folks that have been here today, Dr. Getz is rolling over in his grave since I made a D at NC State University in power. I worked at a nuclear power station for 3 years. That ought to make you feel real helpful. But I am a telecom guy, and I think that our perspective is that the grid is not viewed as a network. And that's a problem, because all the things they talked about this morning, all the sessions with, take it from distributed generation all the way out to data analytics, the grid has to become, by inspection, more secure, more transactional. And the infrastructure that underpins that, and how do you do that? You know, how do you aggregate distributed generation? How do you deal with supporting the data necessary to do financial settlements? That's where we're headed. So we're in the platform business, and our view is that we love all customers, particularly those that need platforms to solve some of the complicated problems that people talked about today.
So I'm with the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, or ARPA-E for short. And our mission is a little bit different because we're a public agency. We're part of the Department of Energy. So I think the simplest way to put what our mission is to maintain the United States technological edge as it relates to energy. That's what Congress sort of set us out to do. And there's 3 components of that mission. So the first is to improve energy security. That includes reducing imports. improve energy efficiency, and then the third is to reduce energy-related emissions. And so what we do, we don't try to duplicate what the private sector does. We get involved at a stage that's far earlier and therefore far riskier than private capital gets involved. And we will only fund anything that is what we call transformational. So it's not sort of incremental to in comparison to whatever's state of the art today. It's a step change better. And so, there's a lot of things, obviously, that are going on in the grid that therefore wouldn't sort of fit in that mission. We have a pretty clear and narrow mission that's given to us by Congress.
Strata Solar builds and operates solar farms, mostly here in North Carolina, but elsewhere across the country. And I guess I've just learned from Locke's definition that we're cool. Because last month we celebrated the $1 billion worth of solar farms built here in North Carolina. And our mission is to bring increasing amounts of clean, zero-carbon energy to the grid at real significant scale.
I'm Nachum Sadan, CEO of GridEdge Networks, and thanks for having me on the panel today. What we do at GridEdge Networks is help independent power producers like Strata Solar, as well as electric utilities, integrate renewables to the grid, and mostly utility scale generation, solar and wind, that is greater than 1 megawatt, that ties directly to the medium voltage grid. And the product that we introduced earlier this year, after 2.5 years of research and development with Northeast Utilities, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and we worked with Northeast Utilities, which is the largest utility in New England, to introduce this product and this solution. It's more cost-effective than existing solutions. It was optimized and designed from the ground up for this particular application, which is protection of distributed generation. And my vision for the company is to continue to help the industry, utilities, as well as independent power producers with additional products that address the challenges at the edge of the grid. And that's why I named the company GridEdge Networks.
GridBridge is revitalizing power delivery systems in a variety of critical applications. Specific inside of the grid, which we've all focused on today, we recognize the needs and the problems, so we won't rehash a lot of those. But GridBridge is really utilizing some of the advancements that have been made in power electronics, combining them with embedded systems, and coming out with a solution or a variety of solutions that help utilities adopt and integrate renewables, offer dramatic improvements in efficiency, and really help out with the reliability and resiliency in the grid. And we're doing that by pushing the capabilities downstream of that substation, the chain link fence area in your neighborhood that feeds 10,000 customers that no one goes to unless there's a power outage, and you're a nerd like me and drive around and look for where the power outage is. But we're actually taking those capabilities and making the grid much more granular on a smaller scale by pushing them downstream and closer to the consumer.
Well, a lot's been said today. Repeatedly we've heard examples of where policy, technology, consumers are changing consumer demand, and that's business consumers as well, consumers of power. Clearly, power and electricity is a huge market. When you have that many forces crashing into there, into a market that size, there's a lot of opportunity for disruption, potentially for new business models, and I think that that's largely what's represented on the panel today. Maybe starting with you, John, because solar is perhaps certainly an example of disruption that's already occurred or is occurring. If you could speak a little bit about, do you think that's has been disruptive to the energy markets, and if so, why? What do you see as you look out kind of over the next 5 years in terms of the impact solar is going to continue to have?
Certainly. I mean, solar certainly has all the characteristics of a disruptive technology. But I'm always surprised by that. There was a question, I guess, earlier today about how much solar is actually on the grid here in North Carolina. It's less than 1% of generation. But it must be disruptive by the amount of attention that we get for 1% of generation. It does, however, represent the opportunity for people to enter into what heretofore has been a relatively closed market for energy generation. It's modular. It doesn't require massive capital to get into the game. And I think for that reason, yes, it represents a disruption. But I don't think more so than any of the other technologies that we talked about. I mean, Rob Caldwell this morning laid out a whole host of technologies that are all going to have significant change to the way electricity is dealt with. I just think solar is probably the most visible of those.
Right. In sort of keeping with that theme, Joe, you know, you laid out sort of in your kind of opening comments that, you know, your vision for, part of the vision for Causam is putting in frameworks, or a framework, I think was the word you used, and platforms that allow a much broader range of players to come into the energy market and transact business. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, if you look at what's happening from the regulatory forces, absent any state PUC action, the FERC has issued more orders in the previous 5 years than the past 15 combined. And you can just name them off. FERC 745, megawatts equals megawatts, under appeal right now at Supreme Court. FERC 750 for fast-acting frequency reserves for battery storage. FERC 755 for onboarding distributed generation. FERC 1000, which is very disruptive. FERC 2003-2006, which says if you're a TDSP, you'd have to define a repeatable business model to onboard solar, wind, natural gas, distributed resources. Well, that sounds a lot like me talking about my experience between the modified final judgment and the Telecom Act of 1996. It's just happening slower. But also the piece that's also most disruptive is what's happening with communications and security. FERC published an article this spring that if 9 key interconnects, I don't know what the wisdom of this was, by the way, since you work for the government, were taken down, that the whole grid goes down. Well, if 65 nuclear reactors scram, what's the restart procedure for that? So it's going distributed. And distributed models by themselves can be disruptive, but in my view, there's money to be made at every level, at both the distribution level and at the supply level, but at the transaction level. So if you put a new paradigm in place, and you think about how Apple changed the way that records are bought, right? If you think about the telecommunications industry, Verizon's not making money in minutes of use anymore. What are they making money in? Applications and services. The power business is not making money on kilowatt hours. And the rate-based model is going to go away. You know, people can take a shot at me anytime they're ready, but it's going to go away. It has to. The last 2 largest transmission projects are not publicly funded. They're privately funded. What would happen if you drove your electric vehicle over to my house and plugged it in? Who gets the bill? I do. Well, so when I describe a platform, we have a very steep intellectual property portfolio and have been buying companies and acquiring companies on the ecosystem of that distributed architecture and where things are headed. So there was a lot of talk this morning about I wish these things were here. The good news, they are, and I think that the companies that all are represented here are probably on the front end of changing how the grid becomes more transactive, more communicative, and more intelligent.
If I may, but how, in this regulatory environment, how does that happen? Because that's certainly not the way our grid is operated.
Well, you know, at North Carolina, you can be a power marketer, and if Duke opts in the tariff for X amount of megawatts that they would sell and deliver over the lines, and if you're prepared to sign that tariff, they got to sell it to you. So if you're signed up as an IPP and you have an ability to pay Duke under terms that they normally wouldn't get paid, do products like we have, I bet you they'd cut a deal with you, and maybe not. But if they don't, go across the border to Virginia, and PJM will, or go to Texas, or I think this morning they talked about New York Rev, and in New York Rev, I think that's ultimately where the TDSPs are going to make a lot of money if they embrace that model, because the New York Utilities Commission said we're going to put the marketplace in the hand of the market participants. That makes perfect sense to me. And I don't think that we should restrain the utilities, because you're always going to need people to go and deliver the power. But they can't make investments in infrastructure unless they're making more money. building power plants is not the right way to incentivize them to making money.
Ken, natural gas, maybe, as we talk about sort of things that are impactful, the advent of hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling has really changed and made this a golden moment for natural gas. Can you speak a little bit about how that positions a company like Piedmont Natural Gas or your industry to go pursue other business models or get into other markets that you might not otherwise be able to pursue?
Sure. It's been a very disruptive technology in terms of that marriage of horizontal drilling and fracking based on a lot of data crunching by computers to unlock source reserves of natural gas and oil and dramatically lower the cost of natural gas. So suddenly we have a century plus worth of natural gas. So it's low cost, stable prices, and all of a sudden there's a lot of things you can do with that. We have to build the infrastructure to get it out of there, like the new Atlantic Coast Pipeline that Duke and Piedmont are involved in. It was Duke's initiative. But with that cheaper natural gas, you can do a lot of things. It enables new technologies. Mentioned before the microgrid. Now, with improvements in technology, CHP and microturbines have real ability to be part of a distributed generation microgrid because it's a lower cost. We talked about power generation. Because you can site and build natural gas fired generation faster and cheaper, and it meets all the air requirements that you need, that's what power generation is going to in the country and displacing coal, and that's good. Sorry, coal states. For our company too, like CNG, compressed natural gas for vehicles, we have 10 public stations, just signed an agreement to do an 11th. We have lots of customers, national account customers have CNG stations at site, and we're moving lots of gas for natural gas as transportation fuel because it's cheap and prices are going to stay low and stable and keep that differential with gasoline and diesel, even as those prices are falling right now. The new pipeline, bringing that into North Carolina out of the Marcellus because of this cheap natural gas, means that not only does Duke have and Piedmont have backup capability with another pipeline into the state, diversifying supply away from the Gulf Coast, now it's the Marcellus, but you're bringing a high-pressure line into the eastern part of the state, which everyone has looked to develop, and that gas and that high-pressure line means there's manufacturing, there's the agricultural farms in the east, there's cities and towns that it wasn't economic to get to before. Now you can get there because you have cheap gas being aided by the attraction of investment in pipelines like Atlantic Coast Pipeline to bring gas to these areas. So there's just multiple ways that it's changing things.
Chad, one of the things that Joe had mentioned is that he comes out of telecom, and this idea of viewing the electric grid as more of a network sort of a concept than perhaps it has been in the past. I know that you have a solution that you refer to as a grid energy router. Can you talk a bit about sort of how you see the grid, as a player that is there to help move electrons around and sort of how that applies?
Move electrons around. That's perfect, thanks. And you're right. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking today just about the traditional grid model not fitting the technology that's coming onto it today. And so that centralized power station no longer fits when you have a variety of consumer-based or utility-based distributed points of generation. And as we see at this stage, energy storage starting to leave the station. So these technologies are coming onto the grid, and they're creating a new grid. And where's the point of value? It's inside of the distribution network. It's no longer that centralized grid needs to feed a 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius. You can feed consumers much more effectively locally and improve the reliability and the resilience by condensing that population that's served. And so we're specifically focused, again, I cited in the introduction that substation, right? That's the last point of energy control, believe it or not, for the approximately 10,000 customers that sit downstream of it. There's 8 feeder circuits, and they each feed, a number of customers, and it all varies based on the density of the population. But what we've seen in the past, right, and telecom example, right, and Joe may perk up or throw something at me, but what we saw in that era, he's going to throw something at me. Look at his eyes. What we saw in that era, right, was the push from the access router into the routers that go behind our home or inside of our homes, and that was done for a variety of reasons. And that analogy is used quite frequently inside of the energy community. But the reason was to manage the variability that's seen in the data networks. Here, again, seen inside of the distribution grid, and offer customization to the consumers. Again, energy needing that customization. So what we're focused on is, again, pushing those capabilities downstream of the substation, packaging those capabilities more near to the consumer.
I'd like to add something on a personal note. I also have a telecom background, and what we do actually is, I think, a good example of merging communications technologies and experience as part of the grid. So basically what we do is we superimpose a digital signal over the power lines, and we use the power lines as a medium to deliver data, to deliver communications. And that's just one example of how you can bring technologies from the telecommunications space and adjust them to adopt them to the power engineering space.
And sort of building on that, Nachum, I mean, one of the concepts that got talked about a lot this morning is this idea of an integrated grid. Your company, fundamentally, that's what you do, is you integrate all these new points of access to the grid. Can you talk a bit about, I think also in one of the prior presentations, they were talking about the IEEE 1547 standard. In order for that to scale, it feels like you've got to have standards. And could you speak a bit about what the issues involved with that are and
Sure.
kind of how you see that playing out?
Sure. Thanks, Locke. So earlier in the day, actually, we heard a lot about the integrated grid from many presenters throughout the day. But the speaker from Schneider mentioned IEEE 1547. So for people in the audience who don't know, IEEE 1547 is actually the standard that defines the rules for interconnection, how to connect renewable generation to the utility grid. And last week, I attended the working group meeting in Atlanta of the IEEE 1547 standard meeting. And I'd like to share with you some of the advanced concepts that industry planners and engineers are discussing. So there are all kinds of challenges, and speakers throughout the day mentioned that there are technological challenges, regulatory challenges, operational challenges, throughout the transformation or during the transformation of the centralized grid to a distributed grid. So as far as IEEE 1547, this standard initially came out 10 years ago, and it's now going through a revision. And I'll just touch only on one point. There are many great topics discussed there. But one point is the definition of the interconnection point. The interconnection point, as John very well knows, today is the switch or the recloser that is at the edge of the grid, or basically the demarcation point between the utility, where the utility stops and the solar farm or wind farm starts, owned by an independent power producer. So, you can see some of the challenges here. Who controls, who owns, how do you share data that is owned by different owners, and how to, the whole integration challenge is very complex. But the definition of the connection point is now moving from the recloser or the switch at the edge of the grid closer to in the case of a solar, the inverter. And a lot has been discussed earlier in the day about smart inverters. And there are the definition of a smart inverter, in my view, is an inverter that has the grid-aware functions. And there are already inverters on the market that already have these functions, but they're not being enabled. And in one of the discussions that I had with an IPP, he said, well, we can push VARs into the grid, but who's going to compensate me for that? The utility, I can get a signal, and this is what we do. We provide the communications between the utility and the IPP. I can send a signal to the inverter to curtail generation, but who's going to compensate me for the megawatts? So you see some of the challenges. This is just the tip of the iceberg, type of challenges that the industry is facing. Most of the challenges, in my view, are not so much technical. The technology is there. There are operational, financial, and regulatory challenges.
We've got about 15 minutes left, so maybe switching gears. Obviously, chasing a big market, how do you finance it? Obviously, energy is a very infrastructure-heavy arena, and as new contenders in the market, how do you fund disruption? And maybe Josh, you could speak to that a little bit. I mean, there seems to be this paradox. There was a lot of activity around clean tech in 07, 08, 09, some bad investments, and now it's sort of almost a bad word in the investing community. Could you talk a bit about what you're seeing, the appetite for capital, and how funding these types of enterprises maybe differ from what we've seen in just kind of more internet pure play companies?
Sure. So, there's the glass half empty and the glass half full way to look at it. The glass half empty is if you look at any of the statistics around early stage funding of any type, not just venture, but early stage funding for energy technologies, it's generally gone down pretty significantly, roughly 09, 10 time frame and on down. That's the kind of glass half empty way to look at it. As you mentioned, there was, whether you call it a bubble, who knows, but there was a lot of capital and people who seemed to get involved in the energy industry, or clean tech as people like to call it, 5-6 years ago, who frankly may not have known what they were doing, and they lost their shirts, they often lost their jobs, they lost a lot of money. Energy is not unlike other industries in that there's, it's almost always cyclical. And so, when we see a lot of the early stage stuff going on in this industry, I'm personally really optimistic. I mean, first of all, everything that we've been talking about, just from a sort of technology perspective, I think people lose sight of, okay, you move from a grid where power flows unidirectionally, meaning from a centralized generation, power plant to where load is, and the only way you can control the grid is you change basically the setting on a power plant, automatic generator set point. That's a really dumb and really inefficient way to manage the grid. And so I get really excited when I think about, okay, then maybe version 2.0 is you have bidirectional power flow. So, you have some generation where the load is, and maybe you can send it back. And then maybe even version 3.0 is a highly transactive future where, you have connected devices, you have much more generation co-located. You're not just sending power flows, in two directions. Maybe you're actually sending it in multiple directions. And so, how does that relate to capital? Well, I think the industry is a lot leaner than it used to be, and I also think that just like a lot of other markets, energy is not different in that A, it's cyclical, and B, it's often motivated by both fear and greed. And I think many of the big vendors and even some of the utilities are seeing a shift from version 1.0 to version 2.0, and even maybe just the beginning of sort of 3.0, which I laid out. And they're, in my mind, rightly being concerned about their core business being disrupted. But also some of them are excited about the opportunities. That's the greed part. And so what does that mean as far as early stage capital? I think for entrepreneurs out there, one thing you got to know is there is no source of capital without strings attached. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying. And so I think, one of the important things that probably, these guys towards the end have encountered recently is you have to know the pros and cons of what source of capital you're taking it from. So if it's traditional private equity or venture capital, they typically want to have an exit, relatively soon at a good multiple. And so that may push you to make decisions you're not comfortable with. It actually may mean that you lose your job and they bring in a new management team. And so you've got large companies as strategic partners. And they want a piece of your flesh in a different way. Maybe their capital is a little more patient. So there's that upside. And then you have places like family offices being involved who in some cases may not know the space as well. You even have foundations being involved who have their own goals, which are non-sort of monetary and financial. And then you have someone like ARPA-E funding things at the very earliest stage. And what we're saying is we're not going to fund anything that the private sector is going to fund. It's going to be off the roadmap because it's going to be sort of trying to take a home run swing. And so if people bring investors in after us, they're saying, wait, this product's not going to generate revenue for a couple years. There's some healthy tension, and we show up every single quarter to monitor your progress. If you're not progressing, we cut you off. It's not a grant, it's a cooperative agreement, which means if you're not doing the work. So anyway, the point I'm making is just like any other industry, I think disruption and change brings challenges. It brings losers, frankly, and it brings winners. And I'm really optimistic about the future, but I think we all need to adjust to an industry which is changing pretty rapidly, and we all need to adjust our behavior and be light on our feet to take advantage of the opportunities there.
Chad, maybe if you could build on that, because I think GridBridge is a good example of a couple of different ways of getting your operation funded.
Yeah, I'll just succinctly just pile on a little bit on that. I mean, we saw in the heyday of energy investments, and I'm not even going to call them clean tech investments, right? We've been trained at this stage. And so in the heyday of those investments, we saw $50 to $100 million going into ventures of this market. Now, just look at the VCs from their standpoint for a second. I don't dislike them. I think that they have a traditional financial model that they have limited partners that have come into their fund, and they're looking for a return within 3 to 5 years with a 10x sort of exit. And so if you apply that financial model to those $100 million investments, it creates a huge barrier to, and ultimately, an exit to a large strategic or to an IPO. And so what we see here is, a transition, less desire to put that much money into businesses, and look to these businesses to be more capital efficient. One of the things that we've learned in the process here is there's other ways to fund the business, especially energy ventures. You don't need to go out and reach out to Silicon Valley right away because you'll get knocked on your butt quite quickly. One of the things that you can do is go to the grant opportunities. If we look at a very successful company here in the Triangle, LED lighting, actually we date back 20 years ago and even 10 years ago in the origin of that company, right? There were 15 SBIR phase 2s. Those are worth between $750 to $1 million a piece that went into that company. 15. That's a lot of money spent on underwriting their R&D, and very valuable, and that company is very successful today. So there's ways to underwrite your R&D by being involved in these grant programs and getting your products out. There's strategic partners. GridBridge has brought in investors in the process, have gone some different avenues as far as bringing investors in, and have brought in beyond the non-dilutive funding, additional capital that is non-restrictive to complement those grants, meet cost matches, things of that nature. So we've gone through, and this is our second round at this stage. We've just closed another majority of that round. We're filling it out at this stage, so there are successes. It's just that the investors want to see a more capital-efficient model.
Traditional VC model does not fit the energy industry. And We also tried, the VC route, and very quickly realized that it will not lead to anything substantial. In my case, being in Massachusetts, the state, and perhaps North Carolina, also provides investment loans. So the state would provide investment loans to startups, especially in the clean tech industry, to retain jobs and grow jobs in the state. So that's another potential source of funding in addition to everything was mentioned on the stage so far.
As you think about, say, the next 5 years and your core businesses and what it's going to take to ultimately be successful in that period, and you can only pick one, do you think that it's the thing that will prevail is product or policy? What's the most important determinant of whether or not you're going to sell another $1 billion worth of product in the next 5 years? Chad?
I go first. Thanks, Locke. I mean, I've grown up being a product person, so I'm naturally going to fall back and say that that product is the way to sell $1 billion or approach this $1 billion market. You can't change physics, and so would you rather have scientists coming together and working with utilities, consumers, whomever, and designing the product, or would you rather have mandates come and force a product down the throats of utilities? We've seen, and we all know in our lives, right, what happens when you have a mandate? You figure out a way to work around it, or you put a Band-Aid on it, right? And so realistically, we're focused, and we believe in the philosophy that we're developing the solutions for utilities, for consumers, to help out with those mandates. Mandates still need to be there, but product.
Joe, what about in y'all's case?
Well, on the capital front, the thing I would offer, and then I'll get to the business case, is you've got to have something that's a strategic competitive advantage. We've taken the position that intellectual property is a big component of that strategic competitive advantage. There's a small company in San Diego called Qualcomm that last time I checked had a $163 billion valuation on a foundation of intellectual property, and that's what Causam has done. It's allowed us to build this ecosystem and these technologies. I was asked almost the exact same question in Charlotte last year at the Charlotte Energy Summit. I didn't get asked back, probably because of the answer. And somebody said, to the federal government, issue a regulatory fiat on energy? And I said, absolutely not. What do you know of right now that the government's doing well? And we're about 6 months away having to go to the post office to get your physical, right? But let me tell you what the federal government is doing, and this is because of necessity, is just like in FCC regulation, FERC is creating the rules. You want to create jobs, decouple every utility in the United States, open up retail competition, introduce rules for technology onboarding, and get out of the way. And I can guarantee you, you won't have to worry about regulatory fiat because the market will always be efficient.
Yeah, I would say to your question, I think the answer is very emphatically policy, but not because of a mandate. It's exactly what Joe is saying. We have a highly regulated industry at this point, and basically what we need are the regulations or the policy that allows access. And that's, I think, what stymied a lot of the innovation that's occurred, that has not occurred in the electrical industry, is because there has not been the access for companies like ours. I mean, Strata has been relatively successful because North Carolina created, in its implementation of a law that dates all the way back to 1978, the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act, North Carolina created a special access mechanism for small-scale energy producers. It wasn't a mandate. That law was put in place back in 1980. But when the market conditions were right, and that was basically when the price of solar came down, companies like Strata have been able to jump in and make opportunity out of that marketplace. So I would say it's policy, but it's not mandate. It's let's get the rules right. Let's allow for access. Let's allow for innovation. Let's allow for startup companies to come in.
You got to help utilities transition.
Yeah.
Because I think they'd make more money in a transactional model than they're doing right now with their current model. And there was a lot of stuff said about, kilowatt hours is a measure unit of power It's water through pipes. Can you imagine instead of having the Sharon Harris Nuclear Power Station, which I worked on as a 21-year-old, I was there when they cut off the rebar on Unit 2 at 78% complete to get rate-based recovery. I bet they'd like that back by now, right? But if you had a model where you can imagine an on-site portal where anybody can onboard their asset, they can onboard their rate plan, they can bid and ask for their services, and you let the utilities and you let the market participants and the retail electric side make more money by making everything transactional and using the infrastructure that exists. By the way, all the stuff they said this morning that they needed, it's here. This companies on this roundtable either have some of the products or all the products that actually implement those models today. So we're assuming that the utilities are last to adopt anything that we're doing, and it doesn't have to be that way. We think the utilities, particularly since now New York is looking forward, CalISO's looking forward, ERCOT's looking forward. We're in North Carolina. We have the largest population of smart grid initiated companies, and I hate that word, intelligent grid companies in the United States. We ought to be leading in that area, showing how you can put a market-based system in, and so that Duke is making money hand over fist. I'm a shareholder. I want to make money.
But Joe, how common do you think it is amongst the utilities that they believe they can make more money in a transactional model?
I don't think they understand it. And you can't put your name on a transactional model platform like you can a power plant. So there's a little issue there too. But
I think a lot of utilities are going that way, though. They understand, they see the writing on the wall. They understand that they're going to have to get into a freer system, whether it's gas, electric, whatever, telecom. And the money's in the transactions, meeting demand. But I end up in your camp on it's product, not policy. Government policies I've seen in the energy sector have created shortages, have created excesses, and then they have to be reactive to all this. It's businesses, large and small startups, that gave the U.S. Cheap energy, advances in technology, the internet. I mean, that's who builds, makes the innovation. And so I think over the long term, fundamentals of product and service is what drives things.
Comcast is selling power now.
And I would observe.
What are they doing about the power business?
Yeah.
What are they doing that for? They could lose $20 a month on power if you buy 2 UFC fights and buy HBO. They could give a rat's behind about kilowatt hours. To my point and what he's saying is that there's more ways to make money in the power business than Carter has liver pills. It's just people got to start thinking a little different.
All right.
And I would observe, this is the third event I've been to where the issue of new utility business model has come up this week, and it's only Wednesday.
Yeah.
So,
Good. Well, on that note, I think we're out of time and wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
where's Bill?
I don't know if we're doing questions or we're just going to go to the bar and answer questions there.
Let's thank this panel and Locke. Wayne Gretzky would be thrilled to be here because these leaders have shown how not to follow the puck around, and they've shown you exactly where the puck is going to be, and I think that's a great compliment. We have time for one or two very quick questions.
A word that probably could have come up even more than it actually did is convergence. And telecom and electric utilities and gas utilities and just information technology all the way down to, I was born in the year, 1959, the year the semiconductor was invented. And all of this stuff has happened in my lifetime. My grandmother was born in 1910 before the Great War, and all of this stuff has come throughout that generation as well. And some of those people are still alive. You guys are basically pointing the way towards utilities, maybe rethinking how they're going to keep their shareholders happy, but also serve their public purposes, while also allowing us to create jobs and reducing the damage to natural resources and to public health and safety by the way we used to do things. So you guys, thank you.
So that's not a question, that's
Just one point I do want to make about that, because I think when people talk about this transactive model, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at it. You can look at it from making money and all that sort of stuff. But I would at least hypothesize that, you know, part of the reason it's moving towards that direction is because that way your power will be cheaper, more reliable, safer. So it's not just about mandates or people want to make money. I mean, you know, it should serve the end goal of getting the consumer what they want in a better, cheaper way.
Great. We'll take one more final question here.
In the morning, we saw that really interesting slide that showed all the renewable energy, especially solar in North Carolina. And I have a policy question in that, connected to that slide in the morning, it was mentioned that North Carolina has the potential, that we're creating the companies that are going to go out and grab a lot of business in the Southeast and beyond. And my question is, next year the 35% tax credit is going to go away. Is there a policy case to have that slowly ramp down rather than just disappear? Is North Carolina risking the potential that the companies that we've been growing that hopefully will expand outward may be jeopardized if that credit just goes poof?
Yeah, I mean, anytime a policy changes abruptly, it creates dislocations in the marketplace. And yeah, I wish that the legislators had, and maybe hopefully they will in this upcoming session, give some thought to something that allows it to ramp down as opposed to simply drive off the cliff. Because yeah, you will see. I mean, we're already seeing it. That there's going to be a huge run-up of companies trying to get in right before December 31, 2015. And that's going to create, you know, all sorts of disruptions in the marketplace. And so yes, if maybe back when we put that particular policy in place, we'd give some thought to how we want to manage the end. I think that will be an issue that I know the industry, the solar industry, will be putting before the legislature of let's think about ways to manage how we run it down as opposed to just drive off a cliff.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful contribution to the day.
Make sure you get your card.
Thank you.